The other day I did the 5-color precon with the slivers. Today we're doing the no-color precon with the Eldrazi and my recommendations for a light upgrade and a much heavier upgrade. Now bear in mind the recommendations I make in these videos are based off of my own playgroup and my own experiences, so you might be experiencing different things within your playgroups, and that is perfectly fine. Let me know in the comments below what you think of my choices and why you disagree or agree with them. So for the cuts that I'm making in this deck, I'm going to take out two of the what I call conditional spells that are based around the Eldrazi. One is not of this world. It's a conditional counter spell that counters something that targets something of yours that's converted mana cost 7 or greater. I'm not huge on something that's this conditional. You have to have something that targets specifically a 7 or bigger. Otherwise, this just sits in your hand as a dead card for whenever, you could have something smaller or whatever, or a board wipe or something like that that doesn't target at all, and this does nothing against those kind of things. So for that reason, it's getting cut. The other conditional spell that's similar to Not of This World that I'm cutting is Warping Whale. It's a bit too conditional for my tastes as well. The only reason to ever use this really is the counter a sorcery part. The other two modes are pretty bad overall. One is just kind of like a pseudo ramp to make a Scion at instant speed and then use it to sacrifice later, or as a surprise blocker, or you can nuke a little mana dork or something like that just once in a while when you see them. It's not a really compelling reason to keep this spell in the deck when we can play better things. The rest of the cuts fall under one umbrella as the reason why I'm cutting them from this deck. And that's because they're artifact creatures. This is not an artifact deck. This is an Eldrazi deck, as implied by the name of the precon, Eldrazi Unbound. But for whatever reason, and I'm really confused as to why they did this, there's actually more artifact creatures in the deck than there are Eldrazi, and I'm serious. Look at the precon, unaltered list. 30 creatures are listed in the base precon, and 18 of them, nearly 2/3 of the deck, are not Eldrazi, they're artifact creatures. So for that reason, I'm cutting Scaretiller, Myriad Construct, Metalwork Colossus, Hangerback Walker, Ancient Stone Idol, Phyrexian Triniform, Stone Coil Serpent, and Steel Hellkite. All of these guys don't really do much for our Eldrazi, and I would use them more in an artifact-centric deck rather than this deck, because just having this much artifact creature in here just doesn't seem right when this is supposed to be the Eldrazi deck. So that gives us 10 cuts for the deck. Now let's make this thing into an actual Eldrazi deck. For the light upgrades, we sadly aren't going to get into the realm of the Eldrazi Titans because they cost so much, but we do have some powerful Eldrazi still at our disposal for not a lot of money. So let's start with adding in Conduit of Ruin. This is a tutor for big threats, and it cheapens up the first one we cast each turn. So yeah, I really like this card being in the deck. We also have Deceiver of Form. It's a pseudo-clone for the Eldrazi that you can reveal the top card of your deck, make it into anything sitting on top, and then you can tuck it on the bottom if it's something you don't want to cast or if you're looking for something else. Otherwise, you can just leave it on top, and you get to cast it again the very next time you draw it. Then we have Desolation Twin. 10 mana, create 2 10/10 Eldrazi. This is a quintessential Eldrazi, and I can't believe it actually wasn't included in the deck over something like the Metalwork Colossus that was put into the precon itself. Next up, we're going to use a couple smaller Eldrazi's to kind of round out our curve a little bit. First up is Eternal Scourge from Eldritch Moon. This was just a way to get a lower cost Eldrazi into the deck so we can work out earlier in the game. Plus, it's really hard to get rid of because you can recast it from exile or anywhere else, basically. Then we also have one of the best Eldrazi ever printed in Thought-Knot Seer. This thing gives us information because we can go look at our opponent's hand and see what's going on. We can take their best threat out of the game. I really don't care if it dies, they draw a card. You've nuked their answers that might be a board wipe or something to deal with your stuff. And then you get a 4/4 body for 4 mana. That's pretty good and makes the cut here. So one more Eldrazi-related spell here. We have Eldrazi Conscription. So we can use this to turn one of our artifact creatures or one of our lesser Eldrazi into a souped-up variation on the Eldrazi, granting them trample, bunch of stats, and Annihilator. So we can just make even the smallest, most pitiful Eldrazi like Eternal Scourge into a real major threat that our opponent has to deal with. Now to get away from the Eldrazi, we'll round out the rest of the deck with some artifacts that actually help us work the deck a little bit better. First up is Expedition Map. With so many specific colorless lands to access in the deck, the map can actually get us a piece of something like the Urzatron or the Eldrazi Temple to get us access to better mana to cast the Eldrazi, or any kind of things that make stuff unblockable. Whatever you really need out of the deck, you can go get it with this and kind of give us basically a pseudo second copy of any land in the deck. And then we also have Semblance Anvil. You got expensive stuff in this deck. Let's make them cheaper. You can exile a creature you don't care about or is less useful to you right at the moment, and you can make all your bigger, better creatures cost 2 less for the rest of the game as long as this thing's out. The bonus is if you can exile something with 2 types on it, such as Artifact Creature, those actually have 2 types, so all artifacts and all creatures will get reduced by 2. So the best thing you can do is actually exile one of the random artifact creatures that we left in the deck. Like, we cut out like 7 of them, but we still have like 11 artifact creatures in the deck that you can exile with this thing and get the double benefit off of it. Then we're going to add an additional mana rock here, Soul Talisman. Now, it's not quite a soul ring, but it's a decent second one that can suspend on turn 1 and be ready to ramp us as early as turn 4. So we're going to go ahead and put this in here to try to get our bigger Eldrazi online a little bit quicker. And the last card I'm going to recommend here is Belby's Portal. Now, this deck is full of really expensive creatures, so we're going to want a card that can cheat them into play and doesn't cost an arm and a leg money-wise. Belby's Portal, you can pay 3, tap it, and you can name Eldrazi when you put it into play, and you can just pay 3 and smack in on Eldrazi. Just remember, though, if it's an Eldrazi with a cast trigger, you will not get that cast trigger if you use this to put it into play, but you can put, a 10-cost Eldrazi into play for 3 mana, essentially, with the card. As for the mana base, thankfully this isn't as difficult to mess with as the Sliver deck was. We're going to remove 5 lands from this, and we're going to add 5 more back in to kind of make the base a little bit better. First, we're going to remove Reliquary Tower, Forge of Heroes, Temple of the False Gods, Arcane Lighthouse, and Mage Ring Network. These lands don't really further the deck for us. +1/+1 counters on our commander don't mean much. We're not spending time charging up the Mage Ring Network. We want to be using our time to spend it and get our big Eldrazi online. We don't draw enough cards for Reliquary Tower to matter that much, and Temple of the False God just sucks. Never fall into the trap of running this land. It's dead until your 5th land drop and can trap you into having useless lands on turns 3 and 4 if you didn't draw any other lands to drop before you were forced to put that thing into play. Been there, done that. It's not fun. Don't make the same mistake I have. So I'm adding in Terrain Generator, 3 more wastes to work with it to work as a bit of a mana ramping setup, and then we also have Hall of the Bandit Lord. It doesn't really tap for mana, comes into play tap, but you pay the 3 life, you tap that mana, and then you can give any of our big Eldrazi haste so they just come in screaming at our opponents right away. So with these changes, let's see what we have here. The precon right now online is averaging around $127.55 to buy on the open market. The main deck ads that I have here cost $25.06, and the land-based ads cost about $10.87. So the grand total to buy the precon, do these upgrades, and put it all together is about $163.44. That's not bad for a deck that actually comes in and does good stuff for us. Now let's take a look at what it would do to do some heavy-duty upgrades to the deck. Same cuts as before, but mostly different replacements. To start with, let's keep the stuff that we're going to keep from the other list. We're going to keep Conduit of Ruin and Thought-Knot Seer. They're going to carry over from the light upgrade list because they just do really good work and they're worth using here. So now comes the really pricey yet powerful stuff that I want to include here. Let's start with Akroma's Memorial. We're going to make these Eldrazi into the stuff of nightmares with this thing. You see a 10 power Eldrazi sitting across from you, it's already a scary threat, but when those things start flying, trampling, first striking, and get her to kill, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Next, I want to get into a more recently printed artifact in the deck, Portal to Phyrexia. We're already discounting our expensive stuff, and one of the best artifacts in the last few years is the Portal to Phyrexia. Of course, cheating it out with something like a Goblin Welder is the preferable way to do it, but since we're not in red, we're going to have to pay retail. But with all the ramp and discounting we have going on the deck, we should be able to get it down pretty quick and kill a lot of our opponent's creatures. The big bonus here, though, too, is we get to bring stuff back. So if any of our Eldrazi have died, we can bring them back. But again, just like with the Belby's Portal, remember, you're not casting those cast triggers. You're not going to get those effects, but you get your big body creature back. Then that's well worth the effort. If the background of this section of the video wasn't a tip-off, we're going to go big here. It's the Eldrazi Titans. Let's start with 2 of the originals that aren't banned in the format. We have Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, and Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre. These are super powerful, super large, and very hard to get rid of since they get shuffled back into our decks when they die. And then they're just a sizable upgrade over a lot of the lesser Eldrazi that we were using in the lighter upgrade variation, and they're just great cards to use. We're also going to go ahead and add in, since the Kozilek the Great Distortion is already in the precon, we're going to add its running mate in Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. The second variation of Ulamog is no slouch, and it can be even said to be stronger than the original variation. It makes a great upgrade for the deck, and the quicker it comes down, the worse for our opponents. The last two main deck add-ons that we're going to add here, and these can be kind of controversial because of the fast mana stuff that people complain about, but in this list, we're going to add Mana Crypt and Mana Vault to the deck. They're just some expensive mana rocks, though, that just help us ramp into these big Eldrazi and smash face as quickly as possible. As for the mana base, we're going to cut the same 5 lands out of the deck, and we're going to keep the Hall of the Bandit Lord upgrade I had from before, but we're going to add some different lands in there. Instead of Wastes and the Terrain Generator, we're going to put in the Eye of Ugin to discount our Eldrazi and have an Eldrazi tutor on hand. We're going to add Scorched Ruin, which can tap for 4 colorless mana as early as turn 3 if the draw comes out right. Ancient Tomb, which taps for 2 whenever we want at the cost of 2 life. And I'm going to butcher the name of this card. I just found it recently. Untadake, the Cloud Keeper. This actually gives us 2 mana for any legendary creature we're casting. Well, since we're adding in extra legendaries to the deck, this works out to help us cast our Eldrazi Titans, helps us cast our Commander, and there's a bunch of good functions here for this card, so I wanted to put it in this version of the build. So thankfully the land base of this deck isn't nearly as bad to upgrade as the Sliver deck cost-wise, but you're going to make up that cost with how the Eldrazi Titan costs are and how expensive these mana rocks are. So let's take a look and see what we got. Again, the precon right now is running on an average of about $127.55 online. The main deck ads here are $315.18. The land base ads here are $126.92. So that's going to run you $569.65 to kind of go ham here and make this deck, high powered as you can without really going into the CEDH territory. So that's what I have for you guys today. That's the Eldrazi Unbound Precon with a light set of upgrades and a heavy set of upgrades. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Keep your eye out on the next video, and I will see you next time.